our reporter Neha Khanna interviewed a Palestinian lady, Hadil Kazaz, in the West Bank, and she's lost family in Gaza. Let's listen into.
To talk about how desperate and nightmarish the situation in Gaza currently is, we're now joined on News9 Live by Hadil Kazaz. She is a Palestinian woman who works with Oxfam and joins us now from the West Bank. Hadil, first and foremost, thank you very much for joining us at a very difficult time. May I begin by asking you, according to the information that you have, because you are so close to that area, how bad is the situation in Gaza? There are a lot of reports coming in that tell us that it's an absolute nightmare for the Gazans. Tell us, what is the latest you have?
The situation is something that we have never seen, not in Palestine, not in other conflicts that we are aware of. Oxfam colleagues have been working with difficult conflicts all over the world, but all of them agree that this is unforeseen, unprecedented type of situation. Not only because of everything is destroyed in Gaza, all infrastructures, roads, hospitals, schools, homes, the death toll is so high. It's higher than Ukraine war so far. It's higher than any other war that happened in recent years in across the world, around the world. Because of the dire situation and the needs for services, basic services, including water, including food, medication, any kind of basic needs are not there anymore. And people are crying for days now because they don't have access to these basic needs. Soon we will have news about deaths due to lack of water and lack of food, not only because of bombardments.
It is a terrible situation. Would it be correct to say, Hadil, that the real death toll is likely to be much higher than what is being reported, because we are told that there are many dead bodies that are lying buried under the rubble of collapsed buildings? These are bodies that have not even been counted. Is that correct?
Yes. These things we also hear, but unfortunately Oxfam had to suspend all its operations in Gaza because all our colleagues and partners are not able to move for their safety. 11 of our colleagues who work in the Gaza Strip are lost their homes or evacuated their homes, and their homes are partially or totally destroyed. Now the 33 colleagues we have in the Gaza Strip, they are not able to assess or to do any kind of humanitarian work because they themselves are in need of humanitarian assistance. So unfortunately, the news we hear that maybe the death toll will rise for thousands or hundreds, we don't know, but we cannot also verify this because we cannot operate in the region.
I understand what you're saying. Talk to us a little bit in detail about the siege, the total siege, and the impact that it has had, apart from the relentless bombings, which have caused many, many, many deaths. You were talking about how people have no food, water, fuel, electricity. It's a desperate situation, no medicines. Tell us about that. How bad is it?
So this war comes to Gaza Strip, which is already a vulnerable and very poor and very highly populated region, in the occupied Palestinian territories. For 16 years before this war, the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip didn't have access to movement, freedom of movement, to travel, high unemployment rates, high poverty rates. 80% of the population of the Gaza Strip were below poverty line. So it is already a dire situation where electricity was coming to people only 4 hours. People couldn't store food because they don't have money and they don't have electricity. So the situation was already bad. 90% of Gaza water is not suitable for human consumption, even before this war. Now we add to this the challenge that the water bombs, the water network is totally destroyed because of the bombardment. We add to this the fact that the electricity was cut since October 12th. If there are few pockets in the Gaza Strip which has either renewable energy like solar panels or generators, but even these are running out of electricity. So people are in total darkness, no access to clean water anymore. There is no possibility to treat even injuries. There were 10,000 injured people in a Shifa hospital alone. One of my cousins got injured because the house next to her was bombarded, and stones and rocks fell on her, and she was badly injured. She went to the Shifa hospital and was treated for first aid only and sent home. For 3 days she was in coma, and the family had to evacuate her to a safer space.
So it's very clear that it's the Palestinian civilians who are caught in the crossfire, and this is something that we've been talking of for several days now, from the day Hamas literally launched their assault on Israel, that it's the Palestinian civilians who are caught in the crossfire. Arjun, where is this all going to end?
Look, Sandeep, the problem is it goes both ways. There were many cases when some of these babies who were massacred in various ways, which I will not get into, there was somebody. There were not just one person, but a number of people said, well, there were legitimate targets. Why is a 6-month-old baby a legitimate target for the Hamas? Is because the so-called explanation, which is no explanation at all, is that they would grow up and become Israeli soldiers.
Right.
So civilians
awful, yeah.
Civilians are to be killed because they are potential Israeli soldiers. So this is the kind of, now the same narrative, if you take it further from the other side, will become, oh, these are not innocent. These people support Hamas. So therefore, they have to be, so this whole problem is getting trapped into this, as they say in Hindi, tu me me, kind of a, you did this, but you did this, but you did this, and you supported this, and this is what happened. That is the worst thing to get into. The point is, there are civilians getting killed. There are absolutely innocent civilians on both sides. Let's not make this into a one-sided versus one-sided.
Right.
Civilians who are getting killed. And people can be cynical about it, that this is collateral damage. I mean, that's a very bad term to use for civilian deaths, including for people who have lives.
Right.
Civilians, whether in Gaza, whether in southern Israel. And how do we find an end to this or find an answer? That's impossible for, I think, anybody. People have been trying this for the last hundreds of years.
Right, but there are a lot of Arab governments who've been, actively working behind the scenes, talking to Israel, talking to all the parties involved, in fact, with Iran, and even the Chinese and the Russians have kind of waded in. But how does this really complicate matters for the Arab governments, who have to listen to their Arab street, as they call it? Does it make it that, this particular attack, does it make it that much more difficult for them to talk peace and de-escalate?
It's not easy. I will not say it becomes more difficult, but it's not easy because they have to listen whether none of them are democracies. They don't have to stand for parliamentary elections or presidential elections.
It's the least democratic region in the world.
They don't have to answer to there's going to be no referendum on whether they should continue or not. So to be cynical about it.
Yeah.
But obviously the Gulf Arabs as well as the Saudi others have to listen to their constituencies.
Yes.
So there is a rumor that is circulating, not confirmed by any Saudi official, that the talks that were going on with Israel and Saudi Arabia been put on hold for the now. There's no confirmation from either side, so we can't go with a certainty of that. But that is a rumor which is also spreading that, see, this can happen.
Right.
And yes, the street does matter. You have to listen. It may not be an election street, election voters, but they have to matter.
Right.
At the same time, if you look at the background, is that Hamas and Israel have been at loggerheads right from the time Hamas took over in 2007.
That's right.
So 2007 they took over. The first thing they did was fired rockets.
Yeah.
Where there was no Israeli. So the so-called occupation of Gaza was not there. There was not a single Jew in that entire territory.
Right.
But they withdrew in 2005. Yeah. So in 2007, as soon as the Hamas took over, won the elections, last elections that they ever stood for, and they won the elections, the first thing they did was stage a coup against the Fatah, against the Palestinian Authority, threw them off buildings. We all saw the footage of that, live things happening, hanging them on cranes, etc. And then what is the next thing they did? They fired rockets at Israel. And then in 2008, there was a clash to put it politely, 2012, 2014, and I think there was one in 2017, then 21, then 22, and earlier this year in May also. So this is like a never-ending cycle. What happens in this thing is there's a rocket attack, the Israeli Air Force attacks, strikes back, then there is some ceasefire by Arab
and it's a cycle of violence.
It's a cycle.
And there's cynically, it's been the expression that's used for it, very cynical, of course, that it's called mowing the grass.
That's the kind of
that, you know, there's a whole crop of terrorists, and then after every few years,
look,
there is
Sandeep,
a violent.
At the end of the day, even when the Prime Minister of Israel, who's understandably, and the people of Israel are very hurt and very wounded at this time, and they are lashing out. Yes, that's understood. But and they agree that Hamas will be wiped out from Gaza, understood. But everybody knows, including the Israelis, that the Hamas leadership, which matters, is sitting in a foreign country.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier, Dr. Manjari. They're all,
the
leadership is all overseas.
Hamas is not going to get eliminated.
Since I'm from Mumbai, I must mention this thing of how, in the 90s, you had this wave of underworld violence in Mumbai. And all of this violence was being carried out by foot soldiers, where all the dons were all offshore dons. They were sitting overseas. And in this case, similar thing seems to be happening, that you have the Hamas leadership that's sitting abroad.
That is how it works generally with terrorists. They never come to the front.
And
they always
they
send
are
their
the
foot
control
soldiers.
centers.
Yes, they are the control centers.
Right.
So the whole question of wiping out Hamas from Gaza, possible.
Right.
Every single overhead soldier or operative of the Hamas may be killed or captured by the Israeli army. Eventually, they do a ground
That seems to be inevitable,
That's going to
Dr.
happen at some
Manjari.
point.
Who replaces Hamas?
How do you stop them?
Right.
How do you stop, especially as we said, that the leadership is sitting there. And this sort of thing, unfortunately, the death of all these civilians, the killing of all these civilians, whether in the hospital or outside, or the other ones that have happened in the last few days, 3-4 days, are used as propaganda, as breeding grounds to recruit more recruits into Hamas. How do you change that?
Who replaces Hamas? I mean, if you assume that Hamas capability is going to be so badly degraded that they won't be a functional organization, what comes after them?
No, but like we were talking about, that the control center is in Qatar, so it can be reinvigorated, right? It can
the leadership stays and then it continues
exactly. So it can
run the organization.
The money comes in.
The money comes, the support comes, the artilleries come, everything. Right. So everything is available. So you can just restart, if I can say that. So that is, that's what I'm saying, that, very apprehensive of this military defeat of Hamas in Gaza. So
military defeat of Hamas is
it's
not
going
likely.
It's not going to.
You're just going to knock out the...
It will help.
If I can go back to a comparison to the 70s.
Right.
In Vietnam, for example, South Vietnam had the paramilitaries, these underground workers. North Vietnam was separate.
Right.
So there was no chance that the United States Army, Defense Forces, could have defeated these guys.
Right.
There was no way, unless you invade North Vietnam and capture Hanoi or something like that. So the similar kind of a thing.
So they are undefeatable. You're saying.
It's not defeatable. This is the terrorist organization. It's like LTTE to some extent.
Absolutely.
Until you go and kill the head.
Right.
And narrow them out and destroy them.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
And especially we have to understand why the leadership is in Qatar, because they know that this is what Israel will do.
Right.
They have read Israel's tactics, they have read Israel's movement, that this is what the IDF will do.